Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which is hosted by the Zimbabwe Carbon Association in partnership with Cicada Carbon. We are delighted to have participants joining from across Africa and around the world as we spotlight Zimbabwe's evolving Article 6 carbon market infrastructure. This will include the country's pioneering progress on national reporting, registry systems, and market readiness. Today's session will explore Zimbabwe's first of its kind blockchain-enabled carbon registry, the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry, as well as the government's Article 6 framework, implementation progress, and the national approach to transparency and integrity. We are also looking forward to hearing insights from our distinguished speakers who will be representing government, technology partners, and the project development community. And now let me talk about a few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, and we are all welcome to submit questions at any point during the discussions using the Q&A section. We will also address as many questions as possible during the discussion Q&A segments. With that, let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our first panel, which consists of Mr. Washington Zhakata, the Chief Director at the Ministry of Environment, Climate, and Wildlife. Let me also introduce Mr. Felix Mechnig-Giordano, an Article 6 consultant, but he's also the CEO of Terraviva. This panel discussion will be moderated by Nick Swardt, the Chairperson of the Zimbabwe Carbon Association. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thanks, Jackson, and welcome, Felix. I think Mr. Zhakata is yet to join. I'm sure he's on important business. I think the first panel, what I want to get into is some of the really technical issues that Zimbabwe's had to overcome in order to secure this rather elusive Article 6 label from Gold Standard, and moreover, the additional label of having had a corresponding adjustment applied by the host country. So, just as a bit of background, there are a number of countries now who have secured an Article 6 label on the back of an LOA, or they're potentially able to secure a label on the back of an LOA, or letter of authorization, which is really, and Felix, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's really a promise on the behalf of a host nation to implement all of the institutional infrastructure that's required to deliver a corresponding adjustment at some point in the future, right? So that letter imposes a burden of responsibility on the government, but it's really a promise to do something in the future, not something that has already been done. And then in order to actually secure the Article 6 label, you need to then go and get some insurance product that insures you against the risk of not implementing that in the future. Now, that's a very different thing to what Zimbabwe's done. Zimbabwe has jumped straight into this really complex space and gone ahead and implemented all of these institutional steps in order to actually deliver a corresponding adjustment. And I think that it's a world apart from the other route that some countries are taking, which is just this promise to do something in the future. So, Felix, I guess we could start at the beginning, which is, or let's start with an overview of the Article 6 architecture that you've been instrumental in implementing in the country. And can you just talk us through the various components and institutions that make up the system that allows us to do these corresponding adjustments.
No problem. Thank you, Nick. So I think to give just the very brief overview of what we've done in Zimbabwe and some of the key differences you find in Zimbabwe versus many of the other countries as they've gone down the Article 6 journey. And I think the first departure point is that when we came to effectively work together with the government of Zimbabwe to achieve Article 6 readiness, we basically went and broke down Article 6 to its foundational points. We did a very thorough review to see basically what was not working from a market side, what was not working from a host country side, what was not working from an institutional side, to come up with something that we found better balanced the sort of which previously were competing needs between governments, project developers, and then the legal requirements imposed by the UNFCCC. So I think the first key distinction and the most important thing to note about Zimbabwe is that unlike many countries where most Article 6 components are still implemented under a policy, everything being done in Zimbabwe right now is backed by the law. So I think Zimbabwe was the first country to effectively legislate every single component of the Article 6 process in an extreme level of detail. And we did that for one of two reasons. So the first was to give the market a sense of security. And the other one was also for us. We found that that was key in order to make sure the government was able to deliver on these promises, which, as Nick said, in most countries still have remained promises. So that means doing corresponding adjustments, handling applications in a timely manner, and basically doing all that compliance work. The second key component about Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe's architecture is that in Zimbabwe, Article 6 really has become the cornerstone of the country's domestic NDC implementation process. So that means that Zimbabwe, we didn't simply approach Article 6 in isolation. It was part of this broader whole of government climate change management approach. So that includes being up to date on the BTR submissions, being up to date on the national communications on NDC 3. And we've been able to consolidate that to effectively make sure that at no stage in the Article 6 process are we promising or doing something which we're not able to do sort of to completion. And I think that has been the key sort of component to success. The other big sort of cornerstone of this system is the online platform. So the ZiCMA, the Zimbabwe Carbon Markets Authority, has now the world's first blockchain national carbon registry, which we'll go into more depth about later. But it's effectively more than that. It's a consolidated, complete online application and processing center that allows anyone engaging in Zimbabwe's carbon market to do all government processes in one place and effectively to see those that work being done in real time. So I think those are the three sort of key components: was this whole of government climate change approach, having everything rooted by legislation as opposed to merely having policy, and then backing everything with the digital infrastructure we needed to actually go out and do these things and execute on the promises that Zimbabwe has made.
Great, thanks. I see that Mr. Zhakata has joined us. Thank you very much for making the time today, Mr. Zhakata. I think it's really important that this audience gets to hear directly from your department, from the top of your department, about the challenges and achievements that that this whole framework represents here. So I think maybe if I can just jump straight in and ask you a question. Maybe we can start with the motivation that drove Zimbabwe to try and access the Article 6 markets. So when this announcement came out, I think it was in August 24, if I remember correctly. So just over a year ago. It was something that all the project developers around the world really were hoping for, right? And it seemed an impossible thing for project developers to access these markets and ultimately access the COSIA market. So when the Zimbabwean government said we're going to actively legislate for this, it was a huge surprise and a huge relief, really, for all of the project developers in the country. But can you maybe just outline a little bit what was the motivation behind the step from government's perspective?
Yes, I think First and foremost, the government has obligations like any other state under the Paris Agreement. And that being the case, we are supposed to meet our obligations one way or the other. And the areas that we have to focus on are also the areas that carbon trading also has been focusing on. It's one of the areas where carbon sequestration is one of the most, I would say, important areas when we look at the issues of emission reductions under the NDCs. So the nationally determined contributions is one of the drivers that motivated participation of Zimbabwe actively in the carbon credit market. And then secondly, this trade itself, it's one of the areas of climate finance mobilization that the country saw it fit to ensure that we also, as a country,
Oh, I think
that
I've lost Mr.
you know,
Zhakata. Are you back? Sorry, you dropped for a bit. Would you mind just repeating the last 30 seconds?
yes. I mentioned that NDCs are one of the motivators for Zimbabwe really to get into the carbon trading effectively, as well as the mobilization of climate finance for implementation of the various climate change adaptation and mitigation activities. We also have the issues to do with the implementation of low emission development strategy for Zimbabwe, which is also one of the main components towards greening the country. And in doing so, we thought partnering also with the private sector and other public sector entities to ensure that we move together along the lines of ensuring that all carbon trading, all emission reduction activities in the country are accounted for. Really brought this motivation for the country to start working on the legislation and to see how we could ensure that we put all projects, all programs, all activities along the lines of emission reductions within the framework of climate change to the knowledge of the government, and also to ensure that this is mutually beneficial to the developer as well as to the country and specifically the community per se.
Yeah. So I think the effect of the legislation, certainly from the perspective of the project developers, has been enormously enabling. I think you joined a bit later than you missed maybe Felix's first point, but the transparency and objectivity that we find when we engage with the ZiCMA platform is really it really makes life very straightforward from a project developer perspective. So that coupled with the market access that is provided by the corresponding adjustments that your department is able to tag credits with is enormously exciting from the project developer perspective. And the hoped for effect is that will drive investment into the green economy in Zimbabwe, and ultimately those benefits will be felt by the communities themselves. Maybe you mentioned NDCs and the fact that this legislation is aimed at helping the country deliver its NDCs. Could you maybe just outline, how the NDCs or the categories of NDCs inform the kind of projects and methodologies that the government is pushing forward in the carbon space?
Yes, our NDC, first of all, identifies the major sources of emissions in the country, and which are basically the agriculture, land use change, and forestry areas is one of the major contributor of the greenhouse gases. Actually, it's at the top, followed by the energy sector, and then we go to industry and waste and so forth. So it means the issues to do with the NDCs implementation in the country also have to be guided by how we are going to be addressing the issues of the emissions in those areas also, which are contributing significantly towards the NDCs, I mean, towards the emissions themselves for the country. The emission inventory for the country is very clear that addressing emissions, for example, in the land sector, forestry-based projects will contribute quite significantly towards the country also meeting its obligation towards the 40% per capita emission reduction target that we have by 2035 under the NDCs. Energy projects, waste to energy projects, and so forth. All these are outlined in the NDC itself that we need really to move into the renewables. We have to transition gradually from the usage of fossil fuels, enhancing our capacity to sequester carbon dioxide, as well as transition to the various forms of renewable energies.
Thank you for that. I think what I'd like to get into now is maybe a bit more of the technical detail. So, as I said, there's a world of difference between a country issuing an LOA and promising to implement all of the systems and institutional framework at some point in the future, and what Zimbabwe's done, which is to actually implement it up front. But Felix, maybe you could just outline the steps of applying a corresponding adjustment and when that corresponding adjustment is recognized by the host country, in this case Zimbabwe, and when it's perhaps recognized by the UNFCCC or the independent crediting standards.
No problem. I think the first distinction to make is that for a project developer, we've tried to keep the process of requesting a corresponding adjustment as simple as possible. So that means that anyone who holds any credits in the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry, whether or not you're the original project proponent who's received those credits at the time of issuance and transfer to the ZCR, or if you're someone who buys credits in the ZCR, you are able to simply log into your account on the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry, request a corresponding adjustment, pay the administrative fee, and it's done. What happens on the back end is that Zimbabwe effectively goes to two places. So the key document when it comes to applying a corresponding adjustment is effectively part of the BTR, so the Biannual Transparency Report. It's the CTF tables. In the CTF tables, this is a document Zimbabwe, as a party to the Paris Agreement, is required to submit to the UNFCCC. There's effectively a dedicated table. I don't know, Karen, if you can pull that up, that effectively provides a record of all the countries' emissions tracking in relation to Article 6. This allows us to effectively run a calculation, and by that I mean allows us to genuinely apply any ITMOs that are corresponding adjusted to Zimbabwe's overall emission target. I think here on the screen you can see basically an overview of that. And so this is the key document, going back to your question, which becomes legally valid the moment which Zimbabwe as a party submits it to the UNFCCC. The moment we're able to do this, so when we update all these tables, so the key important things on this rather boring and bleak looking Excel spreadsheet are at the bottom, which is Zimbabwe's final emissions balance for the applicable year. Here, of course, we add the tons of CO2 which have been correspondingly adjusted. Then the other calculations all come back to the CMA decision to maintain Zimbabwe's compliance. We effectively show our working. Because Zimbabwe has a single year NDC target, this is basically showing how we apply a corresponding adjustment over the entire NDC period. That means, as you'll see there are some corresponding adjustments applied to years where the actual reduction didn't take place. There are two things to sort of consider there. The rest of the tables, again, are effectively showing the working through the various steps required by the UNFCCC as part of their compliance process. And the key thing to sort of keep in mind is the final emissions balance. This is crucial. And of course, the total number of corresponding adjustments applied for each year in which those emissions reductions were achieved. The moment Zimbabwe submits this to the UNFCCC, it is legally binding and the corresponding adjustment is considered to have been completed. Separately to that, Zimbabwe, we've gone a step further. So Zimbabwe became the first country in the world to submit what is so-called regular information report. So this effectively is a longer form text document in which a country is required to provide much more detail on that corresponding adjustment. So here we not only say the quantities, but we list the serial numbers and effectively explain the dates and what happened. So I think that's the document which most market participants, it's the easiest one to understand. That really explains what we've gone and done. The CTF table, however, is the one that makes it legally binding. And it's at that point. So once Gold Standard or the independent crediting standards are able to verify that CTF table has now been uploaded by the UNFCCC, that then is the point where a corresponding adjustment has been applied. And Karen just pulled up a copy of the regular information report. So we update this as well every single time we update the CTF table. And this again goes into a whole significant depth on what exactly Zimbabwe is doing, what has occurred on what date, and to what serial numbers. This provides, I think, the best degree of transparency, which the CTF table does not. So again, Zimbabwe is the first country that's been able to do this report. It's not actually due until April next year, but we made the decision very early on to simply submit ahead of schedule and update it continuously to make sure that anyone who really wants to understand what's happening in Zimbabwe can do so in a single document.
So I think, one follow-on question for this. The biennial transparency report is delivered to the UNFCCC every 2 years. Is that correct? I mean, judging by its name.
Yes.
Yes. And our last one was submitted when?
In December 2024.
Okay, so December 26 is the next time a BTR will be submitted. So I guess one technical question is, without a BTR covering the 25 period, is it possible to apply a corresponding adjustment to those credits until the next BTR is produced, or can we still submit CTF tables to the UNFCCC in the interim if we have an emissions balance for 2025?
At the moment, it seems to be the general consensus is we can. So we can submit for every year in which we can accurately determine an emissions balance. So there naturally is a lag, which means, of course, firstly, until the year 2025 is over, and then we need to allow some time for the technical team to review and go through and process all the data which has been collected from this year. You can submit a corresponding adjustment. However, there will always be that lag. And I think here it's where it's crucial to engage with insurers, because the way the system is built, effectively under normal circumstances, there is a 2-year lag. Zimbabwe has been quite fortunate because, again, like I said, we adopted a whole of climate change approach to this, that we've been able to effectively accelerate and not only meet the UNFCCC deadlines, which very few countries have been able to do, but we've actually been able to get ahead of our obligatory reporting. But I think for market participants, you can always factor in with a 6-month to a year lag. And I think that's something that the nature of the reporting makes it quite challenging to overcome. But we hope that potentially in a forthcoming CMA decision, there can be some more clarity on that, because at the moment we're going based on international standards of best practice. Unfortunately, the CMA decisions are not always as clear as we want them to be, but this is what has been accepted now by Gold Standard as well as the market and the Secretariat.
Okay. I think we're slightly running out of time here, but I think there's 2 issues that I'd like to cover quickly. And the first maybe directed to Mr. Zhakata. Zimbabwe's one of the first, if not the first country to create its own transactional registry. There's a number of countries which have a tracking registry, which is effectively a spreadsheet that kind of keeps track of all the credits that are generated in their country. But what we've done is a step further, and it is an actual registry where the credits move from gold standard onto our national registry. They then have various processes done to them, including levies deducted and so on. And the credits can then move off that registry. And they can be transacted on the registry. So this is a fairly unique proposition. And I think when it was first suggested back in August 24, there was some market pushback because it was felt by the buyers in particular that they couldn't buy a credit on the Zimbabwe carbon registry because the Zim registry wasn't registered for ICAO and Corsia, and therefore we can't do Corsia trades on this registry. So can you maybe explain the rationale behind having our own transactional registry in the country, and what benefits that delivers for the ministry in particular, I would say, in terms of A, transparency, and B, maybe price discovery on the credits themselves?
Well, on this issue, the Zimbabwe carbon registry itself, we came to really decide to have this at national level, looking at the dynamics globally, and the fact that we needed also to ensure that we have also some full control of what is happening within the framework of carbon trading in our own areas of jurisdiction. And coming up with our own, really, it would be an issue that would give us also a certain level of autonomy, but we needed to ensure that we ensure environmental integrity and also sustainable development, and so we would have to see and track even our projects without having to be guided from elsewhere. We thought we had the capacity, we had the dedication, and we had the full support from the head of state and government, the president himself, Dr. Idi Mnangagwa, to say we can support the country to come up with a registry itself and a carbon trading platform that can link up with other platforms. And we started also the trade at local level and then expand it to international level. Although right now we've started with the international level, but we want also eventually to have also in-country tradings happening also. So all this would have to be started if we had the guts really to start implementing our own registry system. So it was motivation brought by the fact that we also participated in the carbon trading issues, even at international level, where we participated as executive members of carbon trading well before this Article 6. And right now we also have a member who sits in the supervisory board of Article 6. And we had this knowledge, and we thought we had the capacity, at least knowledge-wise, to start implementing carbon trading.
Yeah, I mean, I think our experience with the registry is that it has worked, very seamlessly. I mean, obviously, in the first few rounds of transactions, there were some hiccups and things needed to get fixed. The pipes didn't work quite straight away, but having worked with the registry now for some months, it's certainly a very smooth and easy process for credit owners to move credits around and trade in that system. But I think this will just take me, I know we're out of time, so I'm going to use some of the 10-minute Q&A that we've got, because I think this is an important point. But the decision to have our own registry has meant that the process of moving credits from a gold standard or Vera onto the ZIM registry and then back to those international registries has meant that the ICAO Technical Advisory Board, TAB, has to review this process before they can allow us to have the CORSIA label. And I just want to maybe, Felix, you can explain what's next in that process and when we expect the TAB to actually consider this and allow Gold Standard to apply the label to our credits, which in all other respects meet all of their criteria.
Yep. So I think the first thing to note is that when we designed the system, we were extremely careful. So we went and did an extremely in-depth review of the TAB's technical guidelines on CORSIA eligibility to make sure everything met all of those requirements. And then in the negotiations between the government of Zimbabwe and Gold Standard, we pushed. It was a challenge, but at the end we got there. So the inter-registry transfer arrangements as they stand now are effectively, on paper, they comply with all the requirements of CORSIA. Unfortunately, we had scheduled this as part of a TAB material change request submitted by Gold Standard earlier this year. Unfortunately, it was not decided on in the current round of the council session. However, we expect to get formal confirmation from the TAB in February or March this year, which would allow effectively all these credits to be labeled as the only of their kind, fully corresponding adjusted, CORSIA eligible, and ready to trade as the result of an inter-registry transfer. So the key thing to note here is that CORSIA was actually designed with these kinds of arrangements in mind. Simply because Zimbabwe had to happen to be the first, that I think largely came down to the fact that most other countries and their national registries didn't have the technical capacity yet to meet those standards. And so we tried to really sort of show that not only can countries put these systems in place, but in certain cases, the transparency and the technology we offer can actually be better than that was currently offered by the private registries. Yeah. We expect a favorable outcome from the TAB at the next sitting in February, March, and then this would pave the way for full CORSIA use of any credits moved along this way.
Yeah, well, we're all looking forward to that. I think I'm now going to throw it open to questions from the participants. If you could keep your questions at this point sort of focused on the technical issues that we've been addressing on the panel, that would be great.
Now, okay, thank you very much, Nick. I see in the Q&A there are a few questions, and if the participants can also send their questions through the Q&A, I will be in a position to share with them, to share the questions with the panelists. So the first question that we have is that how does one access funding for a forestry academy to train foresters, establish tree nurseries, and also build a laboratory and a library?
I think Jackson, that question's kind of whilst I'm sure very pertinent for many project developers, is not really on the technical front.
On the agenda.
Yeah, so it's not really on the agenda for today, but we'd certainly be happy to help Simba understand that offline.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you. The second question is the Zimbabwe government involved in any negotiations on bilateral agreements under Article 6? So I would assume this one is for Mr. Zhakata. Is the Zimbabwe government involved in any negotiations on bilateral agreements under Article 6?
Yes, we have initiated discussions around Article 6.2, where we can have bilateral agreements with the country in order to really trade directly now under an agreement portfolio. So we have through embassies here in Zimbabwe and also others abroad. We've approached countries such as Singapore, we've written to Switzerland and Malaysia and among other countries to start establishing these country-to-country bilateral agreements. So that one I can say yes, we've received some positive responses, but we are yet to really sign the agreements. But everything is in process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhakata. The next question is, what is being done to lobby the government of Zimbabwe to simplify the process of corresponding adjustments?
I think maybe I can take that, Jackson, from the perspective of the association.
Yes.
I think actually the process of securing a corresponding adjustment is extremely straightforward in Zimbabwe compared to any other country. So we're in discussions with project developers all over the continent, and they can't believe how straightforward it is to get a corresponding adjustment under this framework. So I think parts of the process are still complex. Parts of the fee structure are still, especially when it comes to the VVB, the auditors, parts of those things still need refinement in the process. But the actual system itself and the delivery of the corresponding adjustments is extremely straightforward. The delays we find and the friction we find is really not in the ZCA or with ZiCMA. It is with the external parties, with the UNFCCC and with the independent standards. So I think as far as corresponding adjustments are concerned, the process is extremely straightforward.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. I think this question has already been answered. I think it's this one was about whether there are any future bilateral sales that will happen on the platform. I think this has been covered already. Yeah, there is another comment here where the participant is saying they will be happy to complement, the government efforts by having the credits trade on an official market such as the Victoria Falls Exchange. I think this is quite positive. So I'm sure bilateral discussions can happen outside this meeting. The next question is, what are the challenges so far that may hinder trade of carbon credits under Article 6? Maybe this one is for Felix?
Yes, so I think the big challenge has been CORSIA. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of the CMA decisions, a lot of the CORSIA processes are quite unclear. So not just unclear from a legal sense, but also unclear from a market perspective. Even us, we've struggled to really understand how and why the TAB makes its decisions. And I think that has created quite a bottleneck. Another key challenge is that because Zimbabwe's system is so new, we saw the learning curve was quite steep. And I mean, not to say the learning curve internally, but I mean externally. So when we've begun to engage with partners like Gold Standard, I think getting all these processes into place from the external side has been slow. And I think recognition has been sometimes lagging. And I think sometimes because Zimbabwe draws back always on the law, which in the long term provides greater stability, greater assurance that what we say we're going to do, we're going to do. We're legally obligated to do these things. That has been quite difficult. We've seen a lot of people struggle to engage with the legalistic nature of Zimbabwe's framework. But I would say at the moment, the current biggest challenge is twofold. It's the lack of bilateral agreements. As Chief Director Washington pointed out, we're very close now to concluding several bilateral agreements. And this was in part a deliberate decision by the government of Zimbabwe to make sure that we weren't negotiating until we had the fundamentals in place. Then the second challenge is still waiting for that CORSIA label. Of course, we had some minor technical issues that, when it came to doing the actual first corresponding adjustment, there was a lot of debate on how best to do that. But I think these then quite quickly resolved themselves. And those are the last two real sort of outstanding issues.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I think we are running short of time here. Let me just give you a few more questions. What steps have been taken to package all these as part of an ESG or SDG offering and be able to unlock funding from various players? If that has been done, how do we participate in that? Maybe let me just add a few more questions. So you guys, the panelists, you can just pick which ones to respond to. A small number of countries have begun applying CAs. How does Zimbabwe's approach compare to other countries?
I
Will
think,
we
Jackson, I think
see-
that's quite a good one, to address, actually. And maybe Mr. Zhakata could answer how our approach differs to, say, that of Malawi, which has also just recently been awarded a CA label for the Hestian project.
Okay, it's okay. Mr. Zhakata?
So, Mr. Zhakata, are you still with us?
Oh, yes, I think I missed the question here.
So the question was, as various other host nations start the process of engaging with Article 6, we are seeing various different approaches emerge. Could you clarify maybe the difference between what the Malawian Hestian project has just done and what Zimbabwe does, and then whether you see that this is going to all conform to a uniform approach over time, or we're going to have a fragmented market here?
Yes, although I may not be very familiar with the Malawian projects, but what is important is that we are in the process of establishing Southern Africa Carbon Trading Alliance, which is quite yet an advanced stage. We had our last meeting sometime mid-year, and we are going to have another meeting in January or February. Yes, to establish this alliance, and then we try to harmonize the way we are conducting business in carbon trading, our carbon markets, and so forth. I think this is the only route that can assist us, because these alliances are already available in East Africa as well as in West Africa. So for now, Zimbabwe, unfortunately we haven't been following anybody. So anyone else coming on board now perhaps may learn one or two issues from ourselves, but we will learn more once this alliance is fully operational, since we expect governments to be the core, I would say, participants in the alliance.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Zhakata. And thank you, Nick and the panelists, for the discussions that are quite enlightening. I know that there are quite a number of questions that haven't been responded to. What we'll do is that, we'll collect all the questions and then respond to them and share that as part of the package for the webinar. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next section of the webinar, which is a demo presentation of the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry. This section will discuss about why a blockchain-based software was used, and also give an overview of the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry's functionality, and also how users can be onboarded on the Carbon Registry. And let me present to you our panel for this section. Mr. Felix, Mechnig-Giordano, the Article 6 consultant, who is also the CEO of Terraviva, and Mr. Harib, Bakhshi, who is the CEO of AC Labs. Gentlemen, over to you.
Would you like me to? I'll just let me present. So I think, Harib, are you ready? Can you pull up the registry?
Sure.
So I think I'll start this off by giving a very, very high-level overview before I hand to the real technology expert, Harib, of what the ZCR system is and what makes the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry so special. And I think this is sort of one of the key things that allows us to do all the things that Nick was talking about, allowing us to do to make CAs easy for credit holders, and to also offer a much higher degree of transparency than most people have. So I think the first thing I'm going to touch on briefly was something alluded to previously, is why did Zimbabwe choose to go with such a comprehensive system? And I think the core behind that decision was basically under Article 6, the core concept of Article 6 is to put countries at the heart of the carbon trading ecosystem. And when we talk about countries, we quickly came to the conclusion is that there was no case for settling for any infrastructure which is anything less than we demand from the private sector. We wanted to go and prove that not only could countries meet those standards, but actually exceed them. And to highlight what we saw as effectively glaring technological flaws and shortcomings in the private registries, such as those run by Gold Standard and the Vera registry and basically any others. So the reason we went with blockchain, if I can just put it in one sentence, was simply to offer the highest level of transparency and assurance. We understand that anytime a government gets involved in this process, there's a natural concern about the credibility, the reliability of anything submitted by the government when it comes to something which is effectively a fungible financial asset. We wanted to make sure that everything is secure, and Harib will speak further to that, in a way that you don't need to take the government of Zimbabwe's word on anything. We wanted every single step in this process to be something that anyone, regardless of the technological ability, can independently verify and effectively prove that what we say we are doing, we're actually doing, what we say is happening with these credits is happening, and that the truth is out there. The core functions of the ZCR as a transactional registry are not just offering everything that a normal registry like the Gold Standard registry offers, but is actually more. Because not only do we offer all the normal transactions, so credit transfers and retirement and all the normal sort of credit functions, of course, we also offer all of the government applications in a single process. That means that you can sign up as a project developer, you can sign up as a buyer, you can sign up as a broker. You can complete the entire government of Zimbabwe compliance process in one place on one platform, which also hosts all the legal and policy information relevant for a project developer. I'll hand over to Harib in just a moment before I circle back, and I think later we can talk about how we got through the first inter-registry transfer. But other key functions include a very high level of GIS functionality, and of course the ability to, as a credit owner, go and submit a corresponding adjustment at any time you want in accordance with the CMA decision. All of this put together, I think in the end became more crucial than we even expected in terms of getting the world's first real inter-registry transfer off the ground. When we were negotiating with Gold Standard and when we've been engaging with the Corsia, TAB, and effectively all bilateral partners, this has been crucial, demonstrating the fact that we can offer this level of transparency, accountability, and security. If it wasn't for that, we would not have been able to have the approvals. We would not be able to have these arrangements in place. Without boring you too much with more talk, I'll let Harib actually go walk you through and show you what the registry does, what it looks like, and how, as a user, you can navigate the system.
Thanks, Felix. I think probably the best place to start is to understand that we've built the entire platform and registry with accessibility in mind. So anyone can go onto zicma.org.zw and can go and validate some of the claims that we're making today independently on their own. Now, in terms of how we want the platform to be seen, as Felix mentioned, it's really quite important that the registry and the platform and the technology is the heart of the carbon market within the country. And whilst we want to ensure that the government has the ability to be able to authorize and regulate this market effectively, we also want it to be very clear that whilst the government are the administrators of this platform, any data that goes through this platform cannot be controlled or changed by anyone. It can't be changed by the government. It cannot be changed by us as the technology developers. Once data goes into the system, it must be considered immutable. And I think if we really just think about, the carbon market as a whole and look at it as a data problem, it's really quite imperative that the data is trusted. For these assets to be considered something secure and something that have real value, it's important that we really take seriously the data integrity side of things. And that's, I think, firstly, where we come on to the blockchain side. What do we mean by blockchain? I think in very simple terms, the blockchain is just a distributed and decentralized database. Once data goes into the system, it can never change. Once data goes into the system, it can be seen and validated by all. So that's really the core reason why blockchain was chosen as a technology. We wanted to make sure that this was a system that was far beyond what anyone else had built in terms of traceability and transparency. Now, the other component, as I alluded to at the start, is accessibility. The entire Zimbabwe carbon registry can be accessed on a laptop or a mobile device or a tablet, and anyone can go and create an account or log in and start to go through the flow to onboard either as a project developer or a buyer or an auditor. And everything happens through this system. So there's no need to go through any manual paperwork. There's no need to have to contact anyone directly from the ministry. Everything can happen in one unified and digital platform. So as you go through the onboarding process, you'll go through a KYC system. You'll submit various pieces of documentation and data. Everything that you submit within the system goes to a dedicated platform for the government to be able to review and approve everything. And I think in the interest of time, I'll very briefly show you what some of these features look like. So if we take an example, project developer account, once you've completed the onboarding process and you've registered as a user, you then have the ability to complete all of the transactions and any of the functionality that you would like to do within one unified system. So, for example, you have the ability to be able to create any projects and onboard those projects. You have the ability to see a list of all of the transactions and payments that you've made. But you also have the ability to be able to do whatever you like with your credits. So if we take this example here and we look at a project that's already been approved with some credits that have been issued, it's as simple as entering how many credits you would like to apply a corresponding adjustment for, or retire, or transfer. And within the digital system, this entire process will happen in an automated fashion. So as soon as you submit that request, it will be sent digitally to the government to review. Once they've validated, everything looks fine, the system will automatically this entire process end to end. So I think that's really one of the key things to understand here is everything happens in one digital system now, and we've done it in that way to ensure that it's as accessible as possible, not just for people who want to participate in the carbon market, but also for the government. We want this entire system to be something that really enables the government to be able to operate in a much more efficient and much more seamless manner. So I think in terms of onboarding and the speed in which users can go through that process and the efficiency in which government can then review and approve or reject users, we've really seen that that's been quite phenomenal in terms of the improvements compared to what's previously existed on the market. And I think in terms of how to go through various parts of the platform, as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of things happening here, given that it's the first fully functional national carbon registry. One of the things that we've done, which is quite important for accessibility, is we've created several different how-to guides. So, for example, how to register as an auditor, how to issue credits, how to corresponding adjust credits. All of these guides can be accessed publicly. So, feel free to go through some of these documents and understand exactly how the system operates. But as I say, we've built it to be as simple as possible, whilst also ensuring that data integrity remains at the forefront. Now, I think perhaps if we have the time, very briefly moving on from how users can go through the platform, I think one of the key things to understand is the traceability aspect. A lot of people have identified that the blockchain is the correct solution for implementing a carbon market and operating a carbon registry. There's several reasons why most people haven't yet gotten to this stage. One of the reasons is the sheer complexity of building a system of this kind. But I think another key aspect is, and something that's often overlooked is not every blockchain-based system is the same. So a lot of people will talk about blockchain, and actually what they're really doing is they're tokenizing a credit. And really the value that you get from that kind of a system is very limited. When we talk about blockchain in the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry, what we actually mean is that during your project onboarding process, every single piece of documentation that you upload, every piece of data that you provide will be stored on the blockchain. And once it goes there, it can never be changed. But more importantly, every single credit within the credit registry is now linked to that data. So for each specific credit, we can link it back to the project. We can see every single piece of documentation that was provided during the onboarding process, and all of that information is being read directly from the blockchain. It can never change. And it gives buyers and any international participants the confidence that these are assets that they can trust. They know that the system is built with the highest level of integrity. All of the information that they see here, they know it cannot be edited. It's effectively tamper-proof. I think one of the other key things that we wanted to ensure is to try and minimize the risk of human error. So as you can imagine, with such an innovative system, a lot of participants start to flood into the market that want to really be part of Zimbabwe's carbon market. And how do you manage that? Well, one of the key things that you need to consider is automation. And we've tried to build a system with that level of automation in mind. So whenever approvals are made by the government, whenever certificates or letters need to be created, for example, certificates of corresponding adjustment or letters of authorization, all of these different things are now created automatically by the system, stored publicly again on the blockchain. And again, it gives people that confidence that they can go and validate that these certificates and letters are real. They can scan the QR code and it will take you directly to the system and show that it's an authentic document issued by the government. So we want to try and minimize human intervention almost as much as feasible, but also give people the tools and the accessibility and the visibility to understand that it's a system that they can trust, and it's a market that's really built with high integrity in mind. So I'll try and keep it relatively brief there, but all of the things that I'm showing at the moment are fully publicly accessible. So you can go on the ZiCMA website, you can look through the project registry, for example, looking at Cicada's project here, you can see all of the documents that were provided, you can look at the different credits that have been issued, everything is public, everything is available for everyone to independently verify and interrogate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Harib. And thank you, Felix, for the insightful presentation on the ZCR. I'm seeing here that there aren't many questions about, the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry. Maybe one pertinent one here is someone asking about the use of blockchain and whether the credits will be modeled into tokens or fungible tokens. Harib?
Yes, happy to answer that one. So, very simply, everything that is currently issued as credits on the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry are tokens. They are tokenized assets. One of the important distinctions that is very important for everyone to really understand here is we aren't talking about cryptocurrencies. We aren't creating something that's expected to be highly speculative. The reason that we tokenize assets is it then means that there's a one-to-one match of a token that's issued on the blockchain and a carbon credit that's been approved in Zimbabwe's carbon market. What that then means is you can actually go on the blockchain and see for every single credit that there's an associated token. And with each token, you can see all of the documentation relating to that token. It also means that from a fungibility perspective, it becomes very easy for Zimbabwe's carbon registry to effectively do inter-registry transfers with other systems. Because these assets are fungible, it becomes very easy to connect to global exchanges. or interact with other registries. It's very flexible, given it has that tokenization layer. Unfortunately, at the moment, most of the other registries in the world aren't currently where they need to be, which is why the inter-registry transfer that we've done so far has been quite manual. I think the next stage in maturity will be API, digital-based communication between registries. And then finally, I think where the market really needs to get to is having all of these credits on chain as tokenized assets and allowing them to fluidly move directly on the blockchain.
Okay, thank you very much, Harib. The other question here that is pertinent is a concern that blockchain does not really ensure integrity or quality, especially where a project developer submits fraudulent data to inflate their issuances. Maybe I can ask Nick to respond to this, because the issue is not about the blockchain Zimbabwe Carbon Registry itself, but it's mainly about safeguards and processes that are there to ensure that projects have additionality, and also projects are accrediting the correct number of credits. Over to you, Nick.
I think, firstly, the new legislation has a number of safeguards and guardrails around a number of these issues. So around FPIC, around overcrediting, around reversals. So all of these things have to be addressed in a comprehensive way when you register your project now. So this is something that the crediting standards themselves also take seriously. But when you want to start your project in Zimbabwe, you have to demonstrate that you have a plan in place to deal with all of those things. So one is that the legislation itself provides some safeguards. I think that other is that over the last 2 years, really, the carbon markets have evolved considerably to provide to allay concerns around integrity, which is where all these kind of questions come up, right? Are you double counting? Are you overcrediting? Or, is there significant reversal risk that you're not addressing? So the crediting standards themselves, either by increasing buffer pools, by using increasingly conservative parameters, or by requiring additional monitoring processes, are all working towards addressing these integrity concerns. So I think it's a kind of two-pronged approach here, in that you won't get issued a carbon credit really now if your parameters are wrong, or if you can't really demonstrate that what you're doing is additional. So the crediting standards won't give you your credits, and then, although if they do, they won't carry any of the requisite labels on them that will allow you to access the market. So for sure, there are still some programs issuing, low integrity credits from old methodologies, but these credits can't really be traded in any real volume, so they're not eligible for markets such as COSIA, and certainly no Article 6 markets would take those kind of credits. And then, our second layer of protection is really important, is that at a regulatory level now, ZiCMA has oversight over how these things are handled in country, and that's a real, I'd say, a real step up from where we were 2 years ago, where it was all rather in the shadows and no one really knew what anyone was doing.
No, okay. Thank you very much, Nick. Maybe the last question here is on how credit buyers can interact with the registry. The question is, does the registry have a marketplace?
Sure. Happy to answer that. And I think just before I go into that, if I can just add to the previous question as well, we aren't making the claim that having the blockchain as the backend and backbone technology within this system will eliminate any risk of fraudulent data. Actually, the key thing here to understand is that there's full visibility into what documentation and data has been entered and who approved each step of the process. So there needs to be accountability. It needs to be very clear who audited the project where the approval was made. The key thing that the blockchain prevents is it prevents any further tampering of the data after. So if accusations are made later on, alluding to the fact that, for example, there was overcrediting, it needs to be very clear around who made all the different steps of approvals and to ensure that that level of data integrity and traceability continues to exist. So I think that those are the key things in terms of where the technology is. It's really just to give full exposure and visibility. And then to move on to the next question around buyers interacting with the registry, there's a few different ways in which this can occur. So today, a buyer can onboard onto the platform and can effectively make purchase agreements offline and then have those credits transferred directly to their account within the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry. The other option is if those buyers are on other registries, the credits can be moved very seamlessly from the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry to another system in which the buyer is. And then I think the third thing, and touching on your marketplace question, it's something that has been developed actually already, and is likely to come out at some point early next year. So there is a marketplace. It's not yet currently public, but there is a fully functional marketplace that's also quite flexible in terms of how pricing occurs. And there's also longer term plans to integrate with exchanges to allow more fluid transactions to occur as well.
Thank you to all our panelists and attendees for joining us today. We have covered a great deal of ground from Zimbabwe's Article 6, the reporting framework, to the broader opportunities for high-integrity carbon development in Zimbabwe, to the technical functionality of the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry. Thank you for your engagement and thoughtful participation. On behalf of the Zimbabwe Carbon Association and Cicada Carbon, we appreciate you joining us and your continued interest in Zimbabwe's carbon market revolution.